say that you're part of a collective impact initiative, or at least that you're interested in collective impact initiatives, and you want to understand what are some of the major pitfalls so that you and your partners and collaborators can be sure to avoid them. So recently it was the 10th anniversary since the Collective Impact Initiative article in SSIR was first published. And to celebrate this anniversary, they asked several experts in the field to talk about their lessons learned and what they hope the future might explore. In one of those articles, the authors wrote that one of the greatest reasons that collective impact initiatives fall short is their failure to focus on equity. The authors of that particular article offered 5 strategies to center equity. So I'm going to talk about those 5 strategies and my recommendations in this video. Previously, there was also another paper that talked about 7 principles to follow so that you focus on equity, and I'm going to weave those into this conversation too so that you can gain the lessons from both papers. The first strategy was to ground your work in data and context and targeted solutions. The 2 principles I'll highlight here is 1, to use data to learn, adapt, and improve, and the other was to customize for context. My recommendation here is to gain some sort of historical understanding of why the issue you're trying to tackle exists. For example, we know that a lot of impoverished neighborhoods were previously also neighborhoods that were redlined. If you don't know a lot about redlining, I'm going to pop in a short documentary you can watch. It's really a short video that quickly describes what redlining is and some of the implications of it. Understanding the history helps us understand that, poverty and outcomes associated with poverty are not necessarily personal failings of a particular community, but might be more closely aligned to policy issues. Understanding some of those root causes or policies and systems that might have led to the situation we have at hand can allow you to be more empathetic of the communities you serve, but also help you understand what sorts of changes might be better suited to address those issues. Another recommendation here is to disaggregate your data. A lot of collective impact initiatives have key indicators that they're following. In the prior video, I called it a universal target or universal outcome that you're working towards. And I also described how you might not just have that universal goal, but also some indicators that help you know if you're on the right track. So as much as possible, you want to be able to disaggregate these indicators. So whether that means disaggregating by ethnicity, gender, or zip code. Let's say your collective impact initiative is a county-wide initiative. It'll help you understand what parts of the county need more support. Another thing to do here is to make sure you're paying attention to the people who are marginalized. So whenever possible, make sure you engage in participatory methods and ensure that their voices are heard. One example I always go back to is back in the day when I worked on healthy eating, active living coalitions. The community I'm talking about is Ontario. They were very interested in using Zumba. Now, the funder was a little skeptical that this would work, and the community itself really pushed through and advocated for what they wanted. And ultimately, what we found is that these Zumbas were a great way to recruit people. It made it so that these Zumba classes and the places where they were held started to become community hubs, and they were the sorts of places where then they can have other resources. For example, they had health practitioners come out and diagnose people. Not only was it important for them to have listened to the community itself knew like Zumba is going to really work here because we know the community members want it, and we know that it'll basically be a great way to attract people to our network. So again, it's just an example of how listening to the community is really important. Another recommendation from the paper is to ensure that you and other collaborators in the coalition have a shared language to talk about race, and equity. The next recommendation is to focus on systems change in addition to programs and services. So I'll call out some of the principles from the other paper that I thought was closely linked. Cultivate leaders with unique system leadership skills. Recruit and co-create with cross-sector partners. So I've talked about systems change in the past. Specifically, I did a whole video on the 6 components or levers of systems change. I think one of the pitfalls here is that some coalitions decide to focus either on programs and services, and some decide to solely focus on systems change. And what they're recommending here is to integrate the two, so make sure that you're doing both and not that you're leaning on just systems change or just programs and services. Systems change is really about long-term change. It's about changing policies, changing practices, the way resources are allocated within the community. All of those things are really, really important, but if you don't focus on short-term outcomes as well, so things that you can actually see or see a change in the lives of the people who are participating and working with you all, it's more likely that they'll become disengaged, because systems change is really hard and it's a long-term strategy. Whereas sometimes programs and providing services, those are the sorts of things that are more tangible. You can see outcomes pretty quickly. You should expect to see at least short-term outcomes right after a program. And that's why collective impact and even just coalitions in general are great, because you can have different people and different organizations focusing on different things at the same time. You don't have to pick one or the other. As long as you make sure that you're communicating with each other, that you're collecting data and sharing it across your network, and that your activities are mutually reinforcing, you can have partners working on different things. You also want to be collaborating with people with a variety of skills, and some of those skills should be related to systems change. Partially, this means making sure that your leaders have facilitation skills. Your leaders should also have a basic understanding of complexity and understand that systems change is often non-linear. And your leader should also be able to build trust among collaborators. The next strategy is to shift power within the collaborative. The principle here is to build a culture that fosters relationships, trust, and respects across members. Be aware that shifting power is very, very difficult. It's going to be especially difficult for those who are used to having all the power. People are going to have to do things that they're not used to doing. For example, I'm sure we've all been in meetings where we might have felt uncomfortable speaking because we thought the other people in the room were more expert than us. And I see it to this day whenever we have community organizers come in, especially community organizers that are brand new, and we're in a room with administrators or, institutional people. They are more quiet than the other people in the room because they might not feel comfortable yet speaking out, or they might not feel like it's their place. So this is where those facilitation skills come into play, and it's why having community organizers on your coalition, it's really important. Another tip from the article is to make sure you have some community building time. So what they recommend here is to make sure that you're building in time for collaborators to come together to get to know each other. The next strategy is to listen to and act with community. The principle I thought was very closely tied here was to have community members participate in your collaborative. What this means is that you should be including the people you're trying to help. One way to do this is to include grassroots organizations that are made up of the group of people you're trying to help. So a lot of communities have grassroots organizations where community members are already involved. So I would encourage you to engage those organizations and groups into your coalition. This might mean figuring out what they focus on and what are their goals, and really thinking about how can our activities align and mutually reinforce each other? And here I'll also encourage you to consider how participatory you want to be. So I've shared this resource in the past, and I want to share it again. So there's a spectrum of participation or community empowerment. So consider where on the spectrum you currently are and be honest to yourself, and your coalition should be honest about how participatory you want to be with community members. Another thing I'll encourage you all to do is to engage in appreciative inquiry. So this is where you really focus on where are we, what's our dream, where would we like the future to be, or what do we want for our community in the future? What resources do we currently have that will enable us to get there, and what are we going to do? As opposed to focusing in on just what are the hardships a community faces. The next strategy is to build equity, leadership, and accountability. The principle that seemed very tied to this strategy was to design and implement the initiative with a priority placed on equity. Some recommendations here are to make sure that you have accountability partners and that people feel comfortable calling each other out. The next recommendation is to make sure that people have a say, especially marginalized people. Make sure you're using good facilitation techniques, like making sure everybody can go around the room and share something. Make sure that you're prepping people before you put them in a room with people they might feel a little intimidated by. Make sure that, you're really being honest about how participatory you want to be, and that you push yourself to be more participatory and give the community who you're trying to serve ownership of the initiative and the coalition itself.